In my younger days, I was always a fan of cartoons. I still watch them to an extent nowadays, I admit. My favorite genre was varied, but I always had a soft spot for the slapstick humor found on networks like Nick and Cartoon Network. One of the best ones I've seen and enjoyed when I was little, was Ed, Edd and Eddy. I loved almost everything about it. The premise, the characters, both major and minor, the art style, and the humor of everyone being smacked around like nothing happened at all. I don't think I've missed a single episode of it. When I was around 13 or 14, my younger brother and I always watched the show every time it aired. After a while, we came up with the idea of recording some of the episodes onto blank VHS tapes. Now, when we need something to watch when nothing is on, we put in the tape and let the Eds entertain our short attention spans. We'd keep recording episodes for as long as the tape could hold, which can bet it has gotten its fair share of use by us. We even wrote, in crayon, the show's name and our own names on the labels of the tape. Now several years have flown over us. We've grown a bit, and the tape has been lost for Lord knows how long. We'd still catch an episode or two if we were bored and channel surfing. These days, I'm either doing something online, just playing games, minding a house and grandparents. It's an interesting life. One fateful day, I'd gone to visit an old family house to see the Peanut Gang. My brother and I were busy trying to kill each other in a video game, Scott Pilgrim, when he had taken a bathroom break. Bored half to death, I had opted to wander around the house and look through old cabinets and drawers. As luck would have it, after digging through old Pokemon and Power Ranger VHS tapes, there was our old makeshift Ed tape. To say I was happy was an understatement. I had just found something of my childhood, the one could call our first project for stupidity. At the end of the day, I took it back home and set it aside. Unfortunately, we had no VHS player with us at the time, since DVD and Blu-ray have abducted them all back to the big tape player in the sky. So instead, I just left it alone in the dresser for another year. Sometime in the new year, as I was setting boxes from the recent Christmas in the back room, I found a bundle of old technology just gathering dust. An old Nintendo, a CPU that I'm sure was running below Windows 98, if such a thing existed, and lo and behold, an old VHS cassette player. Now right off the bat, I completely forgot about why I wanted this in the first place and left it alone. But after seeing the tape still dusting on my dresser, I dashed right back to pick it up. You can guess what happened next. Episode after episode, I smirked and watched the memories flood. The quality was a bit horrid, but I just ignored it. It was pretty normal as far as an old recorded VHS could go, I guessed. I just sat back and enjoyed the shows. I was happy with myself. I could name each episode before the title card swung by. However, one episode started a bit differently, as the title card didn't play after the opening sequence. It just dove into the episode without a word, which, from what the start told us, I could recognize as a twist of Ed. The episode played as usual. Ed was his normal, somewhat happy self, as he cleaned the table and continued to name off things he re-whatevered. Right after he finished, the screen flickered and the color was in black and white for a second or two. It was back to normal again, and Ed was running off to pick up the lipstick, as the episode was meant to, but he didn't. Instead, he did his usual run over to it and lifted it up. Nothing. The lipstick was gone. Ed's animation still played as if he was holding it, yet his dialogue conveniently omitted the words, "lipstick dispenser in my backyard." His animation clearly had him speaking the lines, but instead, a low droning sound played as he spoke. This continued up until he was looking around nervously. At this point, I was waiting for the scene to play out. Marie Kanko was supposed to launch out and attack Ed, but instead the screen dimmed and returned to black and white. Ed wasn't moving anymore, and instead was frozen still. Not even the usual movement of the outlines. The brightness was flickering and the droning and crackling of the audio somehow got louder. and louder it remained as Ed's next line nearly broke my eardrums. "No, please! You wouldn't dare!" I tried to lower the volume with the remote, but it didn't operate at all, which, considering the remote was working just fine to turn on and fast forward a little while ago, was more than unusual. I tried to fast forward, rewind, stop, anything, but it had no effect on the remote. Finally, the scene began to play. I saw lovable Ed overfilling his cereal bowl, as was meant to be. At this point, the remote seemed to be functioning well again. I could change the volume as well as stop it if I wanted to. I let my heartbeat settle down as I hit play and let it continue on. The episode played without a hitch as Ed was running to hide in the van in the junkyard with the other two. They exchanged their issues and Ed shouted at Eddy's stench. Oddly enough, although it was correctly used, Ed's dialogue always sounded off. It wasn't as loud nor as energetic as it should have sounded, and strangely enough, his colors were washing out and faded. Other than that, everything looked and worked well enough. The scene slowly stuttered and flickered again. However, as Ed got into the back of the van to lay and ponder, he was again motionless, and the scene started to dim as he folded his arms and laid still. Eddy and Ed was still going on as usual, repeatedly chanting, "Think, think, 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 think." The volume again peaked and cracked over the speakers. Their chanting started to get really skewered. The sound was hard to describe, but at best it sounded like the words were being screamed by someone who was in severe pain. Ed himself was silent. Only the low droning from before played out as the scene had focused on him, struggling to think. Ed slammed on the horn, as the scene originally did, but the horn did not sound at all. The only sound it gave was a strange and sickening crunch. The incredible volume was unbearable now. The remote again rendered useless. I had enough, and stood to shut it off myself. However, before I could, the screen fell into pitch black, as yet another scream from Ed echoed out painfully loud. "Help me!" he exclaimed. I stood frozen, my hand already extended to shut it off and everything. The episode continued on, and he seemed to skip ahead, as now I was watching the cankers walk around a goofy, smiling Ed. I just stayed and watched. I was curious now, and it was obvious something was off. For one thing, it was strange how these errors are completely gone from the rest of the tape, since the episodes prior to this one were completely clean. No bugs, no volume changes, no different brightness problems, nothing. As the scene panned to focus on Ed and Eddy in a tree, instead about Ed's plans to use reverse psychology, there was a serious issue. Namely, the lack of Ed. He wasn't in the shot at all. The spot where he was supposed to be was just a shade of purple, as was the rest of the tree. The rope that held him was gone as well. Eddy was looking over and was talking as if he was still there, but yet no audio again. Now his dialogue was low and sounded like a drone, save for one clear as day part in his words. "Ed's a goner." Now the line was obviously used to reference Big Ed down below, but it was still pretty chilling to hear, since Ed and Ed don't really have any different pronunciation. The scene continued on, Ed really giving those cankers a run for their money. Now the scene was really fucked up. At the point where Ed was supposed to run by with his quip, "We're not done yet, Eddy," the screen went black and white yet again, and an even louder static explosion. I couldn't hear myself, so I know I was cursing up a storm. I went to reach again for the power on the TV, but again was cut off by something else. The screen was still in fuck-up mode, with the static breaking my eardrums and the brightness dimmed to the point where I couldn't see shit. However, it brightened a bit and showed the scene was different. I was looking at what looked like a wooden plank wall that the Eds usually either break or sit on. In very drippy paint, the words "You forgot" were slapped on. The screen stayed frozen here, as I could hear something else coming through the speaker. It was Ed again. He was repeating a line from what I thought was a different episode. He was droning it on and extending it like someone was deathly moaning out. The static took a stop and was instantly silent as the line was finished. Remember. The screen then slowly brightened. What was there was disturbing, as now we're obviously at the scene where Ed was calling the cankers dainty do-something darlings and welcoming them home as he was supposed to be. But he wasn't speaking and was frozen in his position as his mouth was wide over his goofy smile. The black and white colouring was still in full force, the white looking clearer through the static than the black, as dark as could be. Then Ed's voice began repeating the words from before. Remember, remember, remember. It continued on. Ed's animation still frozen as his eyes slowly sank into a dark, black nothing in sight, as if he lost them. His teeth and tongue were also drowned in black, and burn marks started to appear on the screen. Remember, remember. I had to hold my ears. I didn't understand what was going on, and the volume was fucking killing me. He was screaming it now. I swear his voice was fucking screaming it right at me from the TV, and the quality was just way too good for VHS at this point. He was pissed off. He was yelling at me to remember. I finally gave up and dove for the power button, shutting off the TV with a sweet silence following. I hit eject and took the tape out. I thought carefully as the words repeating again and again in my head. Now as I held the tape in my hand, taking a seat on the couch, I really gave it some thought. I know it's just a tape, and I know it wasn't real. I was probably having a hell of a daydream. But that haunting image of his face, that screaming, just the tone of his voice in which he was screaming. Was he angry? He was mad. And the only conclusion I had at that moment, that he was angry, I forgot about me. I forgot about me forgetting him, and or the tape. I forgot him, and I left him alone. I tossed the tape back inside the VCR and resumed from where I left. The episode played out perfectly with the usual subpar quality of the VHS tape. Ed and Eddy were chasing the cankers, and Eddy was still a pussy. I rewound the tape and played it again. The screen was okay. The sound stayed the same. Ed was normally speaking and was in the scenes he was supposed to be. As I opted to stay and watch the rest of the tape again and again and again, the scene with Ed saying, love knows no bounds, turtle doves, or something like that. His eyes and mouth were always black. I only hear it happened. He won't forgive me.